The underground bunker shuddered violently, dust cascading from reinforced concrete walls as another orbital strike liquefied the surface 3 kilometers above. Proximity alarms screamed a cacophony of desperation, their electronic voices a stark counterpoint to the bone-deep silence of impending extinction. Captain Area Chen stood motionless, her weathered hands gripping a communication terminal salvaged from the Jakarta Quantum Research Center. Around her, the 8 remaining members of humanity's last strategic response team moved with the precision of people who had nothing left to lose. Each was a ghost of their former self. Survivors culled from the most critical research and military programs, the last embers of human potential. To her left, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez hunched over a quantum computer that looked more like a surgical nightmare than a piece of technology. Cables snaked from custom-built modules, each piece scavenged from different research stations, military outposts, and even consumer electronics. His hands moved with a surgeon's precision, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that flickered between multiple data streams. The terminal crackled. Another transmission, this one from the lunar colonies. Complete breakdown. Centauri forces cannot hold. God help us. The message dissolved into static, but Area had heard enough. She'd been collecting these fragments for weeks, each transmission a puzzle piece in a horrifying galactic map of destruction. Rodriguez, she called, her voice a controlled razor's edge. Run the pattern analysis again. The scientist didn't look up. His eyes, ringed with sleepless purple circles, remained locked on the quantum computer's shifting displays. 17th iteration, he muttered. Each transmission carries more than just audio. There are quantum signatures embedded in the carrier waves. Beside Rodriguez, Sarah Kim, a communications engineer who'd survived 3 separate Centauri attack waves, was rapidly cross-referencing the transmission fragments. Her left arm was a complex prosthetic, replaced after a previous encounter with alien combat drones. Where most would see a disability, she transformed it into an advanced signal processing unit. Pattern is consistent, she announced, her voice devoid of emotion. The Centauri aren't just conquering. They're systematically eliminating any potential resistance across human-controlled space. A massive tremor shook the bunker. Emergency systems flickered, casting the room in strobing red and gray. Somewhere above, another section of Earth's surface was being transformed into radioactive glass. Rodriguez looked up, a dangerous glint entering his eyes. They think linearity is strength, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. They believe technological superiority guarantees victory. They're wrong. Area studied the team. George Ramirez, a former quantum computing specialist, was recalibrating energy distribution systems. Dr. Elena Volkov, a xenobiological researcher, analyzed alien communication protocols. Each person represented a discipline, a perspective that the Centauri could never comprehend. We're not just survivors, Area said quietly, her words cutting through the bunker's mechanical sounds. We're humanity's last algorithm. The Centauri believed they were hours away from humanity's total extinction. They were spectacularly, fatally mistaken. A new transmission began to resolve on the screens, but this one was different. This one carried the first whispers of a counterattack that would redefine warfare across the galaxy. The quantum computer hummed with an almost sentient energy, its custom-built modules absorbing and processing information at speeds that would have been impossible just months ago. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez leaned back, his eyes burning with an intensity that bordered on madness. The madness of a brilliant mind pushed to its absolute limit. It's not about beating their technology, he announced to the team, spreading a holographic map of Centauri invasion patterns across the bunker's central display. It's about understanding their fundamental weakness. Sarah Kim approached the display, her prosthetic arm interfacing directly with the system. Intricate data streams began to weave themselves into complex geometric patterns. Where most would see chaos, she saw opportunity. Their entire strategic network is built on absolute certainty, she explained, rotating a three-dimensional representation of Centauri fleet movements. Hierarchical systems are predictable. They have a fatal flaw. They cannot conceive of true randomness. George Ramirez, the quantum computing specialist, pulled up a series of complex algorithms. His fingers moved like a pianist, each touch creating cascading probability matrices that seemed to dance and shift impossible. Traditional military strategy is linear, George said, his voice calm despite the bunker's occasional tremors. Attack, defend, counterattack. The Centauri have conquered hundreds of civilizations using this model. But humans, we don't think in straight lines. Dr. Elena Volkov stepped forward, her expertise in xenobiology providing a critical perspective. She had spent years studying the Centauri's biological and technological infrastructure, understanding not just their weapons, but their fundamental psychology. Their neural networks, she began, pulling up detailed scans of Centauri command ship systems. They're designed for absolute efficiency. No room for improvisation. No capacity for true creative problem-solving. Rodriguez's eyes gleamed. Exactly. They see chaos as a weakness. We'll show them it's our greatest strength. The team had been working for weeks, transforming salvage technology into something entirely new. The quantum computer was more than just a machine. It was becoming a living, adaptive system that drew its power from human unpredictability. Sarah interfaced her prosthetic arm directly into the system, lines of code racing across her augmented vision. "We're not just building a defense," she muttered. "We're constructing a living, breathing counter-invasion algorithm." Pieces of alien technology, human research equipment, and completely improvised systems began to merge. A communications module from a destroyed research station, fragments of Centauri communication interceptors, quantum entanglement devices never meant to be used in combat. George began explaining the core of their strategy. Most defensive systems try to predict and counter specific threats. We're creating something different, a system that doesn't just respond, but actively learns and transforms. The quantum computer began to pulse with an almost organic rhythm. Lines of code became living streams of information, adapting, shifting, finding connections that no traditional system could comprehend. The Centauri believe technology is a tool, Rodriguez said, a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. We know technology is an extension of creativity, of will. Dr. Volkov brought up biological comparison models. "Look," she pointed to a complex diagram. "Their technological systems are like a rigid exoskeleton. Powerful, but inflexible. Ours will be more like a living organism, constantly adapting, learning, growing." The bunker itself seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the world continued to burn. But here, in this moment, something unprecedented was taking shape. Area Chen watched her team, seeing not just survivors, but the embodiment of human potential. "We're not just fighting for survival," she said quietly. "We're fighting to redefine what's possible." The quantum computer pulsed again, and for the first time since the invasion began, something that felt remarkably like hope filled the underground bunker. They weren't preparing a defense. They were building a revolution. The first test of their system was a symphony of controlled chaos. Dr. Sarah Kim stood perfectly still, her prosthetic arm interfacing directly with the quantum computer. Sweat beaded on her forehead, not from physical exertion, but from the intense mental concentration required to navigate the most complex communication system ever conceived. "Quantum entanglement isn't just a scientific principle," she muttered, more to herself than to the team. "It's a language, and we're about to become its most fluent speakers." The damaged Centauri communication module they'd salvaged from a previous skirmish lay dismantled across multiple holographic interfaces. Each component was a puzzle piece, and Kim was reconstructing it with the precision of a neurosurgeon and the creativity of an avant-garde artist. Rodriguez watched her work, understanding the delicate balance they were attempting. "We're not trying to destroy their communication," he explained to Area Chen. "We're introducing uncertainty. Quantum uncertainty. The bunker's environmental systems hummed with a barely contained energy. Outside, the world remained a scorched wasteland, but here, in this moment, something revolutionary was taking shape. George Ramirez began running probability matrices that defied traditional computational logic. "Look," he said, pointing to a complex holographic display. "Their communication network is fundamentally hierarchical. Linear. Each message follows a predictable path, with predetermined verification protocols." Dr. Elena Volkov stepped forward, her xenobiological expertise providing a critical perspective. The Centauri view communication as a pure transmission of information. Binary. Absolute. They don't understand the concept of potential, only confirmed states. Sarah's prosthetic arm began to glow with a soft blue light, quantum entanglement circuits weaving an invisible network through the salvaged Centauri technology. "We're going to introduce something they've never encountered," she announced. "Deliberate, mathematically precise uncertainty." The quantum communication virus wasn't a traditional computer virus. It was something far more elegant and dangerous. Instead of destroying communication channels, it would subtly manipulate them, introducing microscopic variations, quantum-level uncertainties that would cascade through their entire communication infrastructure. "Imagine," Rodriguez said, his eyes blazing with intellectual excitement, "sending a message that simultaneously exists in multiple potential states, not just encrypted, fundamentally uncertain." The first test began. A single quantum-entangled communication packet was prepared. To any traditional scanning system, it would appear as a standard Centauri fleet communication. But beneath its surface, it carried something unprecedented, a mathematical payload designed to introduce controlled chaos. The packet was launched. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Centauri communication networks continued to function with their usual mechanical precision. But deep within their systems, something was changing. Ship captains began receiving subtly contradictory orders. Navigation systems developed microscopic uncertainties in their calculations. Weapon targeting became increasingly erratic. Not enough to immediately trigger emergency protocols, but sufficient to introduce doubt. "We're not breaking their system," Sarah explained, watching the first results cascade across her displays. "We're making it question itself." Arya Chen watched the team work, understanding the profound nature of their strategy. This wasn't traditional warfare. This was something entirely new, a form of conflict that targeted the very foundation of the Centauri's technological superiority. Gorga's probability matrices began to dance with increasing complexity. "Each communication packet is creating a quantum interference pattern," he said, "like dropping stones in a pond, but each stone exists in multiple locations simultaneously." The Centauri fleet's communication network began to show the first signs of systemic stress. Not a breakdown, something far more insidious. Uncertainty. "They rely on absolute certainty," Rodriguez whispered. "We're introducing the most dangerous variable possible, mathematical ambiguity." As the first hour of the quantum communication virus deployment concluded, something remarkable began to happen. The Centauri fleet's perfect, mechanistic coordination started to fray at its mathematical edges. They weren't just fighting. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of technological conflict. The quantum whisper had begun. The Centauri High Command convened in their primary decision nexus, a massive organic technological interface that spanned an entire command ship. Holographic displays flickered with increasing urgency, each projection more chaotic than the last. Grand Strategist Krelak studied the incoming reports with mounting confusion. In 3 centuries of galactic conquest, the Centauri had never encountered a resistance like this. Their entire military doctrine was built on absolute predictability, on the mathematical certainty of technological superiority. "Explain," he demanded of the lead communication analyst, his voice a low resonant vibration that made the organic interfaces pulse with tension. The analyst's tentacular appendages moved frantically across communication interfaces. "Impossible quantum fluctuations in our communication networks. Orders are being Modified. Redirected. Our verification protocols are failing. Another strategist interjected, her biomechanical exoskeleton twitching with barely contained anxiety. Not modified. Fundamentally altered. It's as if our communication itself is becoming unreliable. Deep within the command ship, complex algorithmic defense systems began to deploy. But these were traditional countermeasures, designed to combat known threats, linear in their approach. What they faced was anything but linear. On the human side, Dr. Rodriguez watched the Centauri response with clinical precision. They're treating this like a traditional cyber attack, he explained to Area Chen. But we're doing something far more fundamental. We're attacking their perception of reality. Sarah Kim's prosthetic arm continued to interface with their quantum computer, her eyes reflecting complex data streams that danced across her augmented vision. Their entire technological infrastructure is predicated on absolute information transfer, he said. We're introducing quantum uncertainty at a systemic level. The planet killer weapon was their response, a massive technological solution designed to completely sterilize Earth's ecosystem. But the humans were prepared. The quantum barricade didn't just block the weapon. It did something far more extraordinary. As the planet killer approached, the barricade began to analyze its entire energy signature, not just its destructive potential, but its fundamental quantum structure. Millisecond by millisecond, the system began to construct a defensive matrix that could not only protect, but potentially turn the weapon's own destructive potential against its creators. George Ramirez monitored the weapon's approach, his fingers dancing across probability matrices that seemed to bend the very laws of computational physics. They're using a standard dimensional collapse weapon, he announced, designed to compress an entire planetary ecosystem into a quantum singularity. Dr. Elena Volkov added her xenobiological perspective. It's more than a weapon. It's a total ecological erasure mechanism, designed to not just destroy life, but to eliminate the very possibility of future biological regeneration. Area Chen understood the stakes with crystal clarity. This wasn't just about survival. This was about preserving humanity's potential. The quantum barricade began to resonate, not with mechanical precision, but with something almost alive. Something that understood the weapon not as an external threat, but as a complex system to be understood, manipulated, transformed. Grand Strategist Krelax watched in growing horror as their most advanced weapon began to behave in ways that defied all computational logic. The planet killer's dimensional collapse algorithms started to fragment. Quantum stabilization fields began to warp and twist. "This is impossible," the lead analyst whispered, a note of genuine fear entering their voice for the first time in Centauri military history. Rodriguez allowed himself a slight smile. Impossible is just a failure of imagination. The weapon's approach continued, but something fundamental was changing. With each passing microsecond, the humans were doing more than defending. They were rewriting the very rules of technological conflict. The planet killer was no longer just a weapon. It was becoming a lesson. A lesson in human potential. A lesson in the power of creative destruction. A lesson the Centauri would not soon forget. Every surviving system became a weapon. Every abandoned network transformed into a strategic asset. The underground bunker had become something more than a command center. It was a living, breathing technological organism that drew strength from humanity's collective desperation and creativity. Abandoned satellite networks, repurposed mining lasers, entertainment AI, medical nanobots. Each system was now part of an unprecedented adaptive network. Dr. Rodriguez stood at the center of a holographic display that pulsed with an almost organic rhythm. "We're not just defending," he explained to Area, his voice a mixture of scientific precision and raw excitement. "We're creating a self-evolving technological ecosystem." Sarah Kim's prosthetic arm was no longer just a replacement limb. It had become a direct interface point for the quantum network, her body literally merging with the technological defense system. Neural pathways that once controlled simple motor functions now processed complex quantum algorithms at speeds that would have been impossible mere months ago. George Ramirez worked on what he called probability engines, computational systems that didn't just calculate possibilities, but actively generated them. Each algorithm was a living thing, capable of spawning entire strategic branches in milliseconds. Traditional AI is linear, George explained, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. It follows predetermined paths. We're creating something that doesn't just learn, it imagines. Dr. Elena Volkov brought a critical xenobiological perspective. She was studying how biological adaptation could inform their technological defense. Look at how immune systems work, she said, pulling up complex comparative models. They don't just defend against known threats. They create entire new defensive mechanisms on the fly. The quantum barricade was becoming something unprecedented. Not just a defensive system, but a living, breathing technological entity that drew its strength from human unpredictability. Abandoned communication satellites that once beamed entertainment and news now became complex signal manipulation arrays. Consumer-grade medical nanobots were reprogrammed into quantum communication nodes. Even gaming AI algorithms were transformed into strategic prediction systems. Every piece of technology humans have ever created, Rodriguez announced, contains a fragment of human creativity, of human potential. The Centauri had conquered hundreds of civilizations by understanding technology as a tool. Humans were showing them that technology could be an extension of consciousness itself. Deep within the network, something extraordinary was happening. The quantum barricade wasn't just learning, it was evolving. Each interaction with Centauri systems added new layers of complexity. It was developing what could only be described as a form of technological imagination. Aria Chen watched her team with a mixture of scientific fascination and military precision. They weren't just defending Earth, they were redefining the very concept of technological conflict. We're creating a defense system that thinks like a human, Sarah explained, her augmented vision tracking millions of simultaneous computational pathways. Unpredictable, creative, capable of lateral thinking that no hierarchical system could comprehend. The abandoned research stations became crucial. A quantum computing lab in Tibet, a deep space communication array in the Atacama Desert, a decommissioned military research facility in the Canadian Arctic. Each became a node in a global defensive network that defied traditional understanding. George's probability engines began to generate strategic scenarios that would have been considered impossible by any traditional military doctrine. Defensive strategies that emerged not from predetermined protocols, but from pure computational creativity. We're not just defending, Rodriguez said, his eyes reflecting the complex holographic displays. We're demonstrating the fundamental power of human consciousness. Dr. Volkov added a critical insight. The Centauri see technology as a tool of conquest. We see it as an expression of potential, of imagination. The quantum barricade pulsed, not with mechanical regularity, but with a rhythm that seemed almost alive, almost human. Each moment, the system became more complex, more adaptive, more unpredictable. The Centauri believed they were fighting a war of technology. Humanity was showing them it was a war of imagination. The first transmission came like a whisper, a carefully crafted message that would tear apart the Centauri's most fundamental societal structures. Dr. Elena Volkov had spent years studying Centauri xenopsychology. Every civilization, she knew, had its vulnerabilities. The Centauri were no different. Their seemingly impenetrable technological superiority masked deep-rooted psychological fragilities. It's not about breaking their technology, she explained to the team. Holographic displays showing complex societal matrices. It's about breaking their belief in their own superiority. Sarah Kim began to interface with the communication systems, her prosthetic arm glowing with quantum entanglement circuits. Each message was a precision instrument designed to exploit the tiniest fractures in the Centauri command structure. The messages were works of art. encrypted not just in traditional communication protocols, but in layers of quantum uncertainty. Each transmission existed in multiple potential states, simultaneously true and false, threatening and reassuring. Centauri ship captains began receiving communications that defied their entire understanding of information transfer. Intelligence reports that contradicted official command statements. Strategic analyses that introduced microscopic doubts into their hierarchical decision-making processes. George Ramirez monitored the psychological impact through complex probability matrices. "Watch," he said, pointing to a holographic display that showed the gradual fracturing of Centauri communication networks. "We're not just sending messages. We're introducing systematic uncertainty." Rodriguez understood the deeper strategy. "Their entire civilization is built on absolute certainty," he whispered. "We're going to show them the power of doubt." The first signs of breakdown were subtle. Communication channels began to develop microscopic inconsistencies. Ship captains started questioning orders that had previously been accepted without hesitation. The rigid hierarchical structure that had been the Centauri's greatest strength was becoming their most critical weakness. Area Chen watched the progression with clinical precision. This was warfare beyond traditional understanding, a conflict fought in the realm of perception and possibility. "We're not just defending," she told the team. "We're demonstrating the fundamental weakness of absolute certainty." Each message was a carefully constructed quantum puzzle. Some contained fragments of seemingly classified information. Others introduced deliberate contradictions that would trigger the Centauri's internal verification protocols. Some messages were designed to be partially true, partially false, existing in a state of quantum ambiguity that would drive their rigid computational systems to the brink of breakdown. Dr. Volkov had discovered the critical vulnerability. The Centauri military structure was fundamentally hierarchical, with each level of command requiring absolute verification from the levels above and below. By introducing systematic uncertainty, they were attacking the very foundation of Centauri military communication. "Look," Sarah said, her augmented vision tracking the cascading communication failures. "Their verification protocols are becoming increasingly complex. Each attempt to verify information is creating more uncertainty." The psychological warfare went beyond simple communication disruption. They were attacking the Centauri's fundamental understanding of information itself. Ship captains began to receive orders that seemed to contradict their mission parameters. Strategic analyses that suggested their invasion might be fundamentally flawed. Intelligence reports that introduced microscopic doubts about the absolute nature of their technological superiority. Gorgias probability engines began to generate communication scenarios that were mathematical works of art. Messages that existed in multiple potential states that could be simultaneously interpreted in contradictory ways. "We're weaponizing uncertainty," Rodriguez explained, a dangerous glint in his eyes, turning their rigid computational systems against themselves. The Centauri fleet began to show the first signs of systemic stress. Communication channels became increasingly erratic. Ship captains started to question orders that had previously been accepted without hesitation. What began as a defensive strategy was becoming something far more profound, a total psychological deconstruction of an apparently invincible technological civilization. Area Chen understood the deeper truth. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a demonstration of the most powerful weapon humanity possessed. The ability to imagine, to adapt, to transform uncertainty into strength. The quantum whispers continued, and with each transmission, the Centauri's absolute certainty began to crumble. The moment of transformation began with a quantum cascade that would rewrite the fundamental understanding of interstellar conflict. Commander Area Chen stood at the epicenter of humanity's most audacious counteroffensive. The quantum barricade had evolved beyond anything they had initially conceived. It was no longer just a defensive system, but a living, adaptive intelligence that understood conflict in ways the Centauri could never comprehend. "We're not just fighting," Rodriguez shouted over the crescendo of technological energy. "We're teaching them the meaning of human potential." The Centauri fleet found itself caught in a nightmare of technological uncertainty. Entire squadrons discovered their most advanced systems turning against them. Navigation arrays began to generate impossible route calculations. Weapon systems developed microscopic targeting errors that cascaded into total computational chaos. Sarah Kim's prosthetic arm had become a direct conduit of the quantum network. Her augmented vision tracked millions of simultaneous interactions, each a potential strategic victory. They built their entire civilization on the assumption of technological absolute. She announced, her voice a mix of scientific precision and raw excitement. We're showing them the power of adaptive intelligence. George Ramirez's probability engines were working at unprecedented levels of complexity. Each computational pathway was a potential strategic vector, generating scenarios that defied traditional military doctrine. The Centauri's linear thinking was being systematically dismantled, replaced by a fluid, adaptive approach that was fundamentally alien to their understanding. Dr. Elena Volkov monitored the biological-technological interactions. "Look," she called out, highlighting complex holographic displays. "Their technological systems are experiencing something akin to systemic shock. It's not just a failure of technology. It's a failure of their entire conceptual framework." The quantum barricade began to do something unprecedented. It wasn't just defending or counterattacking. It was learning, evolving, transforming the very nature of the conflict in real time. Centauri ship captains began to receive orders that contradicted everything in their operational protocols, strategic analyses that introduced fundamental doubts about their invasion, intelligence reports that seemed to exist in multiple contradictory states simultaneously. Rodriguez watched the progression with a mix of scientific fascination and strategic precision. "We're not destroying their technology," he explained to Area. "We're forcing it to question its own fundamental assumptions." The counteroffensive was a symphony of controlled chaos. Abandoned communication satellites became precision signal manipulation arrays. Decommissioned research stations transformed into quantum entanglement nodes. Even consumer-grade technologies were repurposed into critical strategic assets. "Every piece of human technology," Sarah announced, her augmented vision tracking the complex interactions, "contains a fragment of human creativity, of human potential." The Centauri fleet began to fragment, not through direct destruction, but through a systematic breakdown of their computational and strategic certainties. Ships began to experience unexplainable navigation errors, communication channels filled with contradictory intelligence. The once mighty invasion force started to turn in on itself. Yorga's probability engines generated strategic scenarios that would have been considered impossible by any traditional military doctrine. Defensive strategies emerged not from predetermined protocols, but from pure computational creativity. Dr. Volkov's xenobiological insights proved crucial. "They see technology as a tool of conquest," she explained. "We see it as an expression of consciousness, of imagination." The quantum barricade pulsed with an energy that was almost alive, not with mechanical regularity, but with a rhythm that seemed to breathe, to think, to adapt. Area Chen understood the deeper truth of their strategy. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a demonstration of the most powerful weapon humanity possessed: the ability to imagine, to adapt, to transform uncertainty into strength. The Centauri had conquered hundreds of civilizations by understanding technology as a rigid, predictable tool. Humanity was showing them that technology could be an extension of consciousness itself. As the counteroffensive reached its peak, something extraordinary happened. The quantum barricade wasn't just defending. It was communicating, teaching, demonstrating the fundamental power of adaptive intelligence. The turning tide wasn't just a military victory. It was a philosophical revolution. The invasion lasted less than 72 hours from the moment of the quantum barricade's full activation. But it wasn't just a victory. It was a fundamental redefinition of interstellar conflict. As the last Centauri ships retreated, humanity had done more than survive. They had demonstrated that technological superiority means nothing against adaptive, creative intelligence. The quantum barricade pulsed with an almost sentient energy, a new form of defense that was part technology, part human spirit. Epilogue. The universe would never look at humanity the same way again. They were no longer just another species to be conquered. They were a force of unprecedented potential. And the Centauri. They would return to their home systems with a chilling new understanding. Humans were not a civilization to be conquered, but a phenomenon to be feared.